Springfield Church of the Brethren. I'm so glad to have you all here today. It is October the 22nd, 2023. We actually have two readings this morning. I might be reading first from Genesis 12, 1 through 8. If you wanted to follow along in your pew Bible, it is on page 8. So way back at the front end. Then I might be reading from Romans 4, 1 through 3. And again, that in the pew Bible starts at the very end of page 797. Maybe I do need to preach to the choir a little bit. Y'all need help over there? They're supposed to be the not troublemakers. Over the next 5 weeks before we come to the end of you might remember the liturgical year ends at the end of November, and then we start Advent. That's the new liturgical year. And so with these last 5 Sundays, I thought we might take a moment to talk about people we don't talk about in depth very often. I wanted to talk about the patriarchs. Now, to be fair, the last one I have on the list, Moses, is not technically a patriarch, but we'll go with it. And each week will be a little different, as each patriarch really has a very different story behind them. So we start, of course, with the first, the one who always gets his name mentioned, Abraham. So this comes from the call of Abraham in chapter 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and all the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. And at that time there were Canaanites in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord, who had appeared to him. From there he went towards the hills in the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. And with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. From Romans. What then shall we say that of Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, discovered in this manner? If, in fact, Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. What does the scripture say, though? Abraham believed in God, and it is credited to him as righteousness. Blessed is the word. So, I wanted to look at the patriarchs, and each of them really is a very different story, and I'm going to approach each of them a little differently. And I felt with Abraham, to be honest, he's got such a huge story. And I just kind of to tell you about who he was, what he chose to do in his life, because in Abraham starts the journey of faith. Yes, there was Adam and Eve, and yeah, there was Noah. But when we talk about God, when Israel talks about God later, they always start with the God of Abraham. It starts with him. The story of Israel starts with him. The story of Jesus starts in Abraham. Actually, depending on the book, it starts with Adam, but you know what I mean. So I wanted to tell you about this man who, as Paul said, it is because of his faith that he is considered righteous. Now, righteous is a very loaded word in the New Testament. It doesn't just mean that they were doing things right, as we're going to hear as we walk through the story of Abraham. Abraham did not do a lot of things right. But righteous means not just doing things right. It means living the way God has called us, trying our best every single day. It's a word that means justice, not as, law and order, blind and holding a sword and a scale, not that kind of justice, but godly justice. And I wanted to tell you his story because I want you to hear this man who makes a lot of mistakes but keeps trying, and how God does not leave him. And so this story starts in the town of Haran. Actually, it starts in Ur of Chaldea, but by the time we get to Abram, at this point Abram, leaving, he's living in Haran with his father Terah and his one brother who's still alive. Can't remember his name all of a sudden. Nahor. And his nephew Lot, who his father has passed away. And he's married to a woman named Sarai, Sarai, who will eventually become Sarah. Now, he is going to break some things that will become rules later in the Torah. And we're starting out with one of the big ones. You are not supposed to marry your half-siblings or siblings. But just a heads up, Sarah and Abram share the same dad. Different mothers. It wasn't that uncommon. So they are living in Haran. He's living there with his brother, apparently his father, and his nephew. He is 75. Ages are going to mean a lot in this because you're going to be questioning some things. Now, I say that because he is 75. His wife is 9 years younger, so give or take about 66. And they both, I'm just going to put that out there because we're going to have a lot of things happening and you're going to be like, wow, Sarah was apparently quite a looker for her age in terms of everybody wanted her, even when she reaches up into her much later years. All right, so they are in Haran, and there God calls him. We don't really know what's been happening with God since Noah. We know there was this whole incident at Babel, but we don't really know anything after that. Maybe Terah worshipped God. We just don't know. But God reaches out directly to Abram and says, come, follow me. And so he travels, he listens, he hears, and he follows God to this land of Canaan. Canaan is a bit of a unique land compared to everything else. It is part of the Fertile Crescent. It's lush, it's green. Many archaeologists think that it is where things like agriculture really began. It was a beautiful land. I don't know about you. I mean, it just, imagine living in a place where you don't really have a home, where things are rough and you're just trying your best. He is a man of herding. Every day going out leading sheep and goats, looking for enough water, for enough food. A struggle every single day. But now he is brought into this land where there's lots of food for all the animals, where they can grow, where they can multiply, where he becomes a very wealthy man. He follows God, he goes to this beautiful land, and he puts up altars thanking God that everything's going so well. And then things don't. Along comes a famine, one that's going to very much echo a famine that happens in the later years under Jacob. And Canaan is struck by this famine, so he goes down to Egypt. Because Egypt doesn't rely on rain, it relies on the Nile. So he goes down to Egypt where there's food. And Sarah, or Sarai, as I said, is a very beautiful woman. So beautiful that the Pharaoh is smitten with her and wants to marry her. Abram is a little afraid. He's afraid of this powerful Pharaoh. And so he tells a half-truth. He says, oh, she's just my sister. And so the Pharaoh goes, great, and he gives them a whole bunch of gold and a whole bunch of animals and takes Sarai to live with him in the palace. Some plagues strike the Pharaoh's household, and that's when Pharaoh kind of figures out that Abram had not quite told the truth. And so he sends Sarai back out to Abram, and from what we can tell, he actually is allowed to keep the dowry, all the animals, all the gold, and he moves back up to Canaan. As I said, he makes some mistakes. I don't know about you, but I'm, for one, no matter how powerful a man is, I don't think I would give my wife away. It's a good way to, well, end up in the doghouse for quite a long time. And this isn't exactly something that God would condone, certainly something God would condemn. I mean, it's certainly relevant in that the Pharaoh's household, who, let's face it, Pharaoh did nothing wrong. He saw a woman, he fell in love with her, and as was standards for the day, you would ask whoever the male leader was of her group, so in this case, what he believed to be her brother, he asked if he could marry her. And the brother said, sure. And it's like, great, here, have all this stuff as my way of thanking you. It's the bride price. He did nothing wrong in this situation. I want to put that out there. This is 100% on Abram. Abram is scared. He allows his fear to rule over him. This is perhaps Abram's greatest weakness. Abram is afraid. He believes in God, he trusts God, but he's always afraid that things are not going to work out the way they should. And so despite his faith, he allows his fear to rule over him, to lead him to make bad decisions. It won't be the first time. So, anyway, they head back up north. They go back to this area that he was tenting for a while and living between what will later become Bethel and was the city of Ai, which Joshua will destroy. There he's hanging out. It's him, all of his family, the people that he owned, his servants or slaves, all his animals, his wife, and his nephew Lot, and all of his servant slaves and animals. And it's not quite enough room for all of them to be there. So a fight breaks out between Lot's men and Abram's men. And so they decide it's time for us to separate. And so they separate, and Lot heads down to an area that will eventually be Sodom and Gomorrah. At this time, God comes and says, look, I know you're still worried. I told you I'm going to hold this promise. You are going to be the father of a great nation, of many great nations. Now, this is a bit of a side story. Lot goes down to Sodom and Gomorrah. There's a big war. Lot is actually on the side of Sodom and Gomorrah in this. But there's a war. People come attack Sodom and Gomorrah. They lose, and Lot is taken captive. And so Abram, upon learning of his nephew's captivity, gathers up his own men, and he goes and he defeats the people that these cities could not defeat. Now, I want to put that out there to kind of give you an idea of the size that we're talking. Cities back then, we're not talking about cities like the size of Akron. The idea of a city, how big is Akron? It's like 100,000, give or take? Almost 200? I think it's about 200. We're not talking anywhere near that size. When we talk about a city, we're talking about a couple hundred people at most. And that's counting men and women and children. When we're talking about Abraham and the kind of people that are following him, he's got basically a small city underneath him. We are talking about probably 100 plus people all moving around, caring for the animals, caring for him, watching over. He is basically the leader of a small tribe that's moving around, living off the land. And they're tough. If there's anything that history tells us, it's those who are living off the land, going from place to place, they are the toughest. I mean, we hear this again and again in like the story of, who defeats all the great nations. Who defeats the Babylonians? The Persians, the descendants of those who were living upon the steppes, who are going around in horse archers. Who defeats the Romans? It's the Huns, who are coming off of the steppes, living off of the land, who are, again, horse archers. And again, we find these great empires that lasted for hundreds of years falling to the people who live off the land, because you got to be tough to live off the land. Just like David, who was so brave and would fight off lions and bears. The people in the city had become comfortable and easy while they were living out there on the edge. And so Abram jumps in. He goes and he takes the battle straight to the conquerors, and he conquers them. And he returns Lot to where he was living. He returns all the treasure that was stolen from Sodom and Gomorrah and these other places. And he makes friends with a guy who, honestly, I don't even know what to tell you about him. Actually, I always have to look at the name if I'm even going to get anywhere close to it. Melchizedek. I only bring him up because he's one of the most interesting people in the Bible. We'll have to do a Bible study sometime to talk about Melchizedek, the high priest of God, before God had priests. Just want to put that out there. Anyway, so he gets back from this battle, and Abraham is still childless. And so he goes to God and says, God, you promised that I would have a great nation of descendants from me. And obviously, I don't have kids. So here's my plan. I am going to adopt Eleazar, my head servant. I will make him my son. And it is through him that my descendants will come. He will take over after I die as my son. And God says no. God says there is a plan. I promise you. Here, do this for me. I know you are fearful. Have a great sacrifice. And so he goes and does this big elaborate sacrifice. And then he falls asleep. He's so tired after all this work. He falls asleep, and God sends him a dream. And in that dream, he shows him how many descendants he will have. Like the sands of the ocean, like the stars of the sky. It is a covenant promise. You will have this land. Your descendants will live here. It's going to take 4 generations, but you will. But even this does not allay Abram's fears. He's still afraid. He wants to make sure that things are going to happen. And then he does probably, honestly, one of the worst things he does. Sarai, who wants to have children but can't, decides to go with surrogacy. Surrogacy was a thing even then. They even had their own language that surrounded it. But I always bring this up with Hagar. Hagar is one of the most important characters in the Genesis story. She is the first one who recognizes God, who calls God by a name, the God who sees me, who sees the inside of me. She is a slave. She is a slave who is given to Abram to have a child with. She gets pregnant, and Sarai doesn't like that, and so she starts beating her. And so Sarai runs away. And then she's out in the wilderness, and God says, Sarai, you need to go back. Hagar, you need to go back. I promise things will be okay. And so Hagar goes back, and she has Abram's first child, a man known as Ishmael. He was so afraid. He decided that he had to make God's promises come true. In doing so in a way that was, frankly, I think if we put it in modern context, we would call that rape. So Hagar had no say in this. Now, things will turn out okay for Ishmael. But God says, this is not the way it's supposed to happen. I told you that. No. Yeah. Now, to let you know, at this point, he is now 86 years old. It's been 11 years since he first left to come to Canaan. We're now going to jump another 13 years into the future, and he is now 99. So you got to imagine, Abram is 99, and he's got Ishmael, who's hanging around. He's a 13-year-old kid. He's now considered a man. He thinks that he's got these things solved, but he's not really sure. But then God comes back and says, as I said, Ishmael is not going to be the way it's going to happen, and I'm going to do some special blessings with you. And so that's when Abram's name is changed to Abraham, and Sarai is changed to Sarah. Abram, by the way, means father. Abraham means great father. Sarai, I don't remember, but Sarah means princess or queen. Don't quote me on that. And this is when at age 99, Abraham is told that the mark of faith in me will be circumcision. So he goes out and he does it himself at age 99. Good job for him. Also, poor Ishmael at age 13, and all the other men who served under Abraham. I'm not putting this out there as something terrible that Abraham did. He was called to do it. It was the right thing to do. I just want to point out as a man, that just sounds terrible. Anyway. I just pointed out it's terrible. So he's 99, she is 90, and he has a dream telling him again that he is going to have a son, another son. And so, soon after, he's visited by 3 visitors. We all know this story, right? He sees the 3 visitors out there. He gets super excited. Man is 99 years old. I have a friend, his name is George. George is getting ready to run another marathon at age 103. But even George, who can run a marathon at 103, does not jump up off the ground. It's just not going to happen. But he jumps up off the ground. He runs out, he greets these men, he brings them in, and he gives them the best food. And these men tell him, you and your wife are going to have a child. And Sarah laughs. How can I am 90 years old, have a kid? And no, it's going to happen. And when they do have a kid, he's actually named, because I laughed. That's what Isaac means, the laughing one, something like that. So, anyway. And then they have this debate about Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm not really going to go into it. It's not really part of Abraham's story. Only to say that we all know the destruction happens, and Lot reappears in the story, and then we're told about where the nations of Moab and, I always forget what the other one is, the Amorites come from, just so we know. Anyway. And then finally, Isaac is born. Finally, his fears are allayed. He has a child. And then he goes and does a terrible thing. We are told when Isaac is old enough to be weaned, give or take about 3 years old, I would say, 2 to 3, he and Sarah kick Ishmael and Hagar out of camp. This isn't like, you getting in a fight with somebody and kicking them off down at the corner. No. This is like you living out in the wilderness, and the only way you can do it is because you're a big community who work together. And they're just kicking them out farther into the wilderness. It's a death sentence. Now, that story actually ends out well, because God promised that Abraham's descendants will be a great nation. And Ishmael, though he is not the one in whom the promise of where all people will be saved, it's not going to come through him. He will still be a great nation. And Ishmael, thanks to God and the intervention of an angel, will survive and will grow. Just putting out there also, he's like 16 at the time. 15, 16 years old. You ever get that vision of, his mom carrying him? It kind of puts it into a new perspective when you think he's like 15, 16 years old. Gotta say, Hagar was strong. Okay. Then Abraham makes some friends with a guy named Abimelech. Oh, wait. I almost forgot. This actually happens before Isaac is born. But, yeah. He goes to this area, the Philistines. He makes friends with this guy, Abimelech. It's basically the name of the person in charge. And Abimelech is really quite attracted to this 90-year-old Sarah, and does the exact same thing that Pharaoh does. And it turns out badly for Abimelech. I point out this story to show that Abraham still is fearful. God keeps coming to him and reminding him that things are going to be okay, and he still is fearful. He still falls into these patterns of trying to protect himself, trying to make sure he is not going to be killed by this person or that person. We already know he's got a strong surrounding, enough that he could take on kings of small cities. We already know that God has come to him again and again, and yet he still is fearful. And then Isaac is born. So I'm getting my timing right now. And now we're going to jump forward to an unspecified period of time. And this is where we get the picture today. You can't tell, it didn't come out as well as I hoped on the screen. It's a hand with a knife and a blood stain. We all know that next story. God reaches out to Abraham and commands him. Here, I'm just going to take your son, your only son, who you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on the mountain I will show you. So early the next morning, he got Isaac and the donkey and the wood and a servant, 2 of them, travels to Mount Moriah. And there he leaves the servants at the bottom and takes Isaac up the hill, who's carrying the wood. Isaac, of course, is asking, we're figuring he's a young boy. Kids ask constant questions. Dad, where's the sacrifice? He knows how this works. This is nothing new. He's done lots of sacrifices with his dad. Nothing like this, though. Where's the meat? Where's what we're taking to give to God? And he gets up there, and somehow 103-year-old something, Abraham manages to wrestle this young boy down, tie him up, and throw him on. And he lifts up his knife, ready to stab down. He has spent all of this story so fearful that things won't happen the way they're supposed to. And finally, things are happening. Finally, God has given him a son. A promise to make a nation has finally come true. And he, because God has asked, is willing to give up what God has promised, to give back to God what is God's. He has conquered his fear. He's willing to trust now that God will make all things right. And as that knife comes down, he is stopped by a voice who says, "You've passed the test." And again, the promise is made. This is your land here. Your descendants will live here, will prosper here. You will be the founding of a great nation that will lead all to salvation. Abraham's story actually begins to wrap up pretty quickly from here on. Sarah passes away. He buys some land where he can bury her. He gets his son, Isaac, married off to his brother's granddaughter, as again tradition is. Her name is Rebecca. Now we're going to go over Isaac next week. I'm not going to tell you Isaac's story, though, next week. We're doing it differently because Isaac's got his own whole set of issues, and we're going to dive into those separately. and not in a story format. And then Abraham gets married again and has 6 more boys, fathering 6 more nations. So, by the way, that means he's fathered 8 nations altogether. Sorry, 8. He's got Israel. He's got the descendants of Ishmael, which are going to be the wild Arabians of the desert, as they kind of are described, and then 6 more nations. And then he passes away. All of his property goes only to Isaac. Sorry, rest of the kids. But Isaac and Ishmael come together. We're actually told he's mentioned by name. Ishmael comes back, and together they bury Abraham with Sarah in what's eventually known as the Cave of the Patriarchs. Abraham spent his whole life afraid. And because of that fear and not trusting, but still trusting, he made so many mistakes. He hurt the ones he loved most for selfish reasons. Let's face it, it was selfish. You know, he hurt Sarah. Might be one of the reasons she didn't want to be around him sometimes. I don't know. She hurt Sarah. Can you imagine your loved one giving you away for their own good? Can you imagine what it was like for Hagar to be used, to be beaten for doing what you were supposed to be doing, and then to be thrown away? Can you imagine what it was like for Lot while he watched his uncle become prosperous and wealthy, while in his own life everything kind of fell apart? Abraham was not necessarily a great guy to be around because he was always afraid, always working to protect himself. And yet when he heard the word of God, and we felt God moving him from place to place, he followed and he tried. Though mistakes were made, he would come back and make sacrifices and atone and try to do right, even if he made the same mistakes more than once. What I always draw from Abraham's story is the knowledge that, we all have our own issues, whether it's fear. I think, honestly, I've had this talk. I'm looking over at Brother Bruce, and he and I have had this conversation a couple times where I honestly believe that the root of most evil in this world is fear. That because we fear, we are greedy. Because we fear, we are, we lash out and harm others. Because of fear, we act out of anger. Because of fear, we do things we shouldn't. But even when we live in that fear like Abraham did, we struggle like Abraham did. He fought it and kept trying to do better. And finally, at the point when everything that he had been promised had come to him, he was able to conquer it. He could have been fearful. He could have said no to God. But he said, yes, I will follow, even if it takes away everything I have finally gotten, everything I have gained. Now, I say all that with the full belief that I don't think God ever meant for Isaac to be harmed in any of this. It was a test to make sure that Abraham had finally gotten through his fear and was willing to be trusting. He was righteous because he trusted God so deeply. That's a hard thing for us. Can you let go of the fear? Can you let go of those things that keep you from really walking in the path that God has called you to walk? Are you willing to give up everything you have gained, everything you have waited for, everything you have worked for? Because God has asked you to. Abraham was not the perfect follower of God. None of us are. But he also is the foundation by which our faith comes. Don't worry if you're not perfect. The first follower of God was not perfect. Just work to conquer. Conquer what keeps you, so that you may trust and be counted as righteous as Abraham was. One last note, as many of you know. When he was up there, as the knife was set aside, they found a ram caught in the bushes. Abraham went over, prepared the sacrifice, and put it on the fire. He went through one of the most traumatic experiences I can think any parent could possibly go through. And after he was done, he thanked God that he was able to go through it. May we all conquer our fear like Abraham did. Thank you. Trust and obey. That hymn was the perfect fit for today. I know it's scary. It's scary to know that you don't know what's coming tomorrow. It's scary not knowing if your foot will hit the ground when you take the next step. It's scary not knowing if you've got the strength. Abraham, father of faith, he was scared. He was being asked a lot of, and he made bad choices because of it. But God did not abandon. God still walked with him. He kept giving him more chances. You can do it. God is not asking you to go live in the wilderness in some other land. At least I assume as much. You can do it in this world. Just trust and obey. Amen.